The bruise on Beatrice Vane's cheek had hardly faded when her stepfather announced he was selling her to cover his gambling debts. At 21, she had endured 4 years of being called useless, a financial drain, and worst of all, a burden. The year was 1873, and in the small mining town of Red Gulch, Arizona Territory, a woman without family or fortune had few options. $50. Her stepfather, Warren Coleman, had barked at the man across from him, a weathered prospector with yellowed teeth and wandering eyes. "That's a fair price for damaged goods." Beatrice stood perfectly still in the corner of their small cabin, her hands clasped so tightly that her knuckles blanched white. She had known this day would come eventually. Her mother's death had left her at the mercy of a man who saw her only as property. 40 and not a penny more, countered the prospector, eyeing Beatrice like she was livestock. "She looks too skinny for hard work." Warren spat tobacco juice onto the floor. "Fine, 40 it is. She's been nothing but a burden anyway." The transaction was settled with a handshake and the exchange of crumpled bills. Beatrice was given 10 minutes to gather her meager possessions before being marched out of the only home she'd known since her mother had married Warren. The town watched with disinterested eyes as she was led away like a reluctant mule. 2 days later, she escaped. The prospector had drunk himself into a stupor, and Beatrice seized her chance, slipping into the night with nothing but her mother's locket and the clothes on her back. She ran until her lungs burned and her feet blistered, ducking into a ravine when she heard horses in pursuit. For 3 days, she survived on wild berries and creek water, moving only at night, heading north toward a town called Prosperity that her mother had once mentioned. She had no plan beyond escape, no hope beyond surviving each day. On the 4th morning, exhausted and faint with hunger, Beatrice stumbled across a small camp where a man was cooking breakfast over an open fire. "Madam," he called, rising to his feet, "you look like you could use some help." Beatrice froze, ready to bolt. The stranger was tall, broad-shouldered, with a weather-worn face that spoke of years under the sun. His eyes were kind, but experience had taught her that kindness could be a mask. "I don't need anything," she said, taking a step back. The man nodded slowly. "That may be so, but I've got more beans than I can eat and coffee hot enough to wake the dead." He gestured to the fire. "You're welcome to share, no strings attached." Hunger won over caution. Beatrice approached warily, keeping the fire between them as she accepted a tin plate of beans and a cup of strong coffee. "Name's Dalton Keane," he said, not pressing when she didn't immediately offer her own name. "I'm heading to Prosperity to deliver some horses for the Barnett Ranch." Beatrice nearly choked on her coffee. "Prosperity, that's right, about 2 days' ride from here." He studied her face, noting the fading bruise and the wariness in her eyes. "I could use some company on the trail if you're headed that way." "Why would you help me? You don't know me." Dalton shrugged. "My mother taught me never to turn my back on someone in need. Besides, these parts aren't safe for a woman traveling alone." "I'm Beatrice," she finally offered. "Beatrice Vane." "Well, Miss Vane, what do you say? I promise I'm not the kind of man you need to fear." Against her better judgment, Beatrice nodded. She had little choice. She was lost, hungry, and if the prospector caught up to her, her fate would be sealed. That morning marked the beginning of an uneasy partnership. Dalton provided an extra blanket and made no comment about her obvious flight from something or someone. He talked easily about himself. He was 27, had been a cowboy since he was 15, and had dreams of his own ranch someday. He didn't pry into her story, though Beatrice caught him glancing at her bruised cheek more than once. By the second day, the silence between them had grown comfortable. Beatrice found herself watching Dalton when he wasn't looking, the easy way he sat a horse, the gentle manner he had with the animals, the quiet strength in his hands. "We'll reach prosperity by nightfall," Dalton said as they broke camp on the morning of the third day. "You have people there?" Beatrice shook her head. "No, it's somewhere my stepfather won't look for me." Dalton nodded, not pressing for more. "Well, Mrs. Barnett at the ranch might be hiring help. She's a good woman, fair employer." "I don't have many skills," Beatrice admitted. "My stepfather never thought I was worth teaching anything useful." Something dark flashed across Dalton's face. "Some men don't recognize value when it's right in front of them." They rode in silence for several miles, the landscape changing from desert scrub to rolling grassland. When they stopped to rest the horses at a creek, Dalton finally asked the question that had clearly been on his mind. "Who hit you, Beatrice? Was it your stepfather?" She touched her cheek self-consciously. "Yes, he sold me to a prospector to cover a gambling debt." Dalton's jaw clenched. "Sold you, like property? $40. He said I was damaged goods, not worth more." Beatrice laughed bitterly. "A burden, he called me, always just a burden." "That man deserves a reckoning," Dalton said quietly. "No person has the right to sell another." "It happens more than you'd think," Beatrice said, "especially to women with no protection." Dalton was silent for a long moment. "Well, you have protection now, at least until we reach prosperity." The town appeared on the horizon just as the sun was beginning to set, a collection of wooden buildings straddling the main road. Compared to Red Gulch, Prosperity was bustling. A general store, saloon, hotel, and various businesses lined the street. Beatrice felt both hope and trepidation as they rode toward the livery stable at the edge of town. Dalton Keane, right on time. A burly man with a salt and pepper beard emerged from the stable. "Mr. Barnett's been expecting these horses." "Jonah's," Dalton greeted, dismounting. "This is Miss Beatrice Vane. She's looking for work in town." Jonah's looked Beatrice over with kind eyes. "My wife helps run the hotel. They might need help with laundry and cleaning. I could put in a word." Before Beatrice could respond, 3 riders came thundering into town, kicking up dust. She recognized the center rider immediately, the prospector, and ducked behind Dalton's horse. "They're looking for me," she whispered urgently. Dalton's expression hardened. He stepped protectively in front of her. "Jonah's, would you mind taking Miss Vane inside while I deal with these gentlemen?" Jonah's, sensing trouble, quickly ushered Beatrice into the stable. Through the crack in the door, she watched as the prospector dismounted and approached Dalton. "You seen a young woman, about 20, dark hair. Ran off with property that belongs to me." The prospector's words slurred slightly. He'd been drinking. "Haven't seen anyone matching that description," Dalton replied evenly. "But I'm curious what kind of property you're referring to." The prospector spat. "A woman. Paid good money for her, fair and square. Did you now?" Dalton's voice remained calm, but Beatrice could see the tension in his shoulders. "I wasn't aware human beings were for sale in the Arizona territory." "Mind your business, cowboy," growled one of the prospector's companions. "Well, see, that's just it," Dalton said, his hand casually resting near his holstered revolver. "When I hear about a man buying and selling people, I make it my business." The confrontation might have turned violent if the town marshal hadn't chosen that moment to emerge from the saloon across the street. "Something wrong here, gentlemen," he called, strolling toward them. The prospector glanced nervously at the lawman. "Just looking for a woman who stole from me." "That's so." The marshal looked skeptical. "What did she steal?" The prospector hesitated. "Money and a watch." "Strange," Dalton interjected. "A moment ago you said you paid money for her like she was property." The marshal's eyebrows shot up. "Is that right?" The prospector backpedaled. "You misheard me. I said she stole my property." "Well, I don't recall any laws allowing the purchase of women in this territory." the marshal said firmly. "If you're accusing someone of theft, you can file a proper complaint at my office. Otherwise, I suggest you and your friends enjoy a meal, water your horses, and move along." The prospector looked from the marshal to Dalton, then spat on the ground. "Ain't worth my time anyway. Skinny little burden would have been more trouble than she's worth." The three men retreated to the saloon, and Dalton joined Beatrice and Jonas in the stable. "They'll be back," he said grimly. "And your stepfather might not be far behind." "I can't stay here," Beatrice said, panic rising in her chest. Dalton considered for a moment. "Jonas, when does Mr. Barnett expect me at the ranch?" "Tomorrow morning's fine. He's just eager to see the new stock." Dalton nodded. "I think Miss Vane and I will head to the ranch tonight. Safer that way." As they rode away from town, Beatrice felt both relief and a new anxiety. "You didn't have to do this. I'm causing you trouble." "You're not causing anything," Dalton said firmly. "Those men are the trouble. Besides, Mrs. Barnett is always looking for help at the ranch. You'll be safer there than in town." The Barnett Ranch lay 10 miles outside of Prosperity, a sprawling operation with a large main house, bunkhouse for the ranch hands, and various outbuildings. Despite the late hour, lights still burned in the main house when they arrived. Eleanor Barnett was a formidable woman in her 50s with streaks of gray in her auburn hair. She listened without interruption as Dalton explained Beatrice's situation, then turned to Beatrice with compassion in her eyes. "No one will sell you or harm you under my roof," she declared. "I've been looking for someone to help with the household and the bunkhouse cooking. Can you cook, child?" "Yes, madam," Beatrice said. "My mother taught me before she passed." "Then you'll stay here. We'll say you're my niece if anyone comes asking questions." Mrs. Barnett looked at Dalton. "Thank you for bringing her here, Mr. Keane. I trust you'll be staying on a while. We could use a man with your skills for the spring roundup." Dalton glanced at Beatrice, then nodded. "I'd be obliged for the work, madam." The following weeks brought a new rhythm to Beatrice's life. She rose early to help prepare breakfast for the ranch hands, assisted Mrs. Barnett with household chores, and learned to manage the ranch accounts. To her surprise, Mrs. Barnett discovered Beatrice had a natural head for numbers, a skill her stepfather had discouraged as unbecoming in a woman. Dalton worked with the other hands, breaking horses and preparing for the roundup. Beatrice saw him mostly at mealtimes, but occasionally they'd cross paths when he came to the main house with reports for Mr. Barnett. Each time, his eyes would seek her out, a silent question, "Are you well?" to which she'd respond with a small smile or nod. One evening, as spring was giving way to summer, Beatrice was gathering eggs when Dalton approached, his hat in his hands. "Miss Vane, Mrs. Barnett says you're heading into town tomorrow for supplies." "That's right," Beatrice confirmed, placing another egg in her basket. "I'd like to accompany you if that's agreeable. There's been talk of those men still asking questions in Prosperity." Beatrice had almost managed to forget about the prospector and her stepfather. Almost. "I would appreciate the company, Mr. Keane." The next day, they set out for town in the ranch wagon. Away from the ranch, a different kind of tension settled between them, not uncomfortable, but charged with something Beatrice couldn't quite name. "You seem to have found your place at the ranch," Dalton observed as they traveled the dusty road. "Mrs. Barnett speaks highly of you." Beatrice felt a flush of pleasure. "She's been very kind. It's the first time I've felt useful." "You were never a burden, Beatrice," Dalton said quietly. "Not to anyone with sense enough to see your worth." His words warmed something inside her that had been cold for too long. "Thank you for saying that." In town, they went about their business efficiently, ordering supplies, collecting mail, purchasing fabric Mrs. Barnett had requested. As they were loading the wagon, Beatrice froze, spotting a familiar figure across the street, her stepfather. "Dalton," she whispered urgently. "He's here." Dalton followed her gaze, his expression hardening. "Get in the wagon, I'll handle this." Before she could protest, Warren had spotted her. "There she is," he shouted, pointing. "The ungrateful girl who ran away." People on the street turned to stare as Warren stalked toward them, the prospector and another man close behind. "That's far enough," Dalton said, stepping between Beatrice and the approaching men. Warren sneered. "This isn't your concern, Cowboy. The girl belongs to Simmons here. He paid good money for her." "No person belongs to another," Dalton replied, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet street. "Miss Vane is a free woman employed at the Barnett Ranch." "She's my stepdaughter and a thief," Warren insisted. "She stole money before she ran off." The marshal, alerted by the commotion, approached the group. "What's the trouble here?" "These men claim Miss Vane is property they purchased," Dalton explained, his disgust evident. "They've been harassing her for weeks." The marshal's expression darkened. "Is that so?" He turned to Warren. "Sir, I don't know how things work where you come from, but in this territory selling human beings is illegal." "I have rights," Warren protested. "She's my dependent." "She's 21 years old," Dalton countered, "and bears the marks of your care on her face and arms." The marshal looked at Beatrice. "Madam, did this man sell you to someone else?" Beatrice found her voice, strengthened by Dalton's presence beside her. "Yes, sir." "For $40 to cover a gambling debt." Murmurs rippled through the growing crowd of onlookers. Women exchanged horrified glances. Men shook their heads in disgust. "That's a serious accusation," the marshal said. He turned to the prospector. "Did you pay money for this woman?" The prospector shifted uncomfortably under the collective stare of the townspeople. "It wasn't like that. I was helping her out of a bad situation. By buying her." The marshal's tone was icy. "I think you gentlemen need to come with me to sort this out." Warren lunged suddenly, grabbing for Beatrice. "You ungrateful burden! After all I did for you." Dalton moved with surprising speed, catching Warren's arm and twisting it behind his back. "The only burden here is you," he growled. "A burden on decent society." The marshal and his deputy quickly took control of the situation, escorting Warren, the prospector, and their companion to the jail. As they were led away, Warren shouted obscenities and threats until the jail door slammed shut behind him. Beatrice stood trembling, the confrontation having drained her newfound confidence. Dalton gently placed his hands on her shoulders. "Are you all right?" She nodded, not quite trusting her voice. Around them, townspeople were dispersing, though many cast sympathetic glances her way. "The marshal will need your statement," Dalton said. "Then we can head back to the ranch." An hour later, with her testimony given and Warren facing charges for his illegal attempt to sell her, Beatrice and Dalton left town. The setting sun cast long shadows across the landscape as they rode in companionable silence. "Thank you," Beatrice said finally, "for standing up for me." Dalton glanced at her. "Any decent man would have done the same. But they didn't." "You did." She hesitated. "When you found me that first day, I was nothing to you. Just a strange woman who appeared in your camp. You could have ignored me or worse." "You were never nothing, Beatrice," Dalton said, his voice gentle but firm. "From the moment I saw you, I knew you were someone worth knowing, worth helping." The words hung between them as the wagon rumbled on. Back at the ranch, Mrs. Barnett took one look at Beatrice's face and insisted she rest while the hands unloaded the supplies. Dalton helped her down from the wagon, his hand lingering on hers just a moment longer than necessary. "Get some rest," he said softly. "You've had quite a day." That night, Beatrice couldn't sleep. Her confrontation with Warren had stirred up memories. She tried to bury her mother's funeral, Warren's escalating cruelty. The day he declared her nothing but a burden and arranged her sale like livestock. She slipped out of the house and walked to the small pond beyond the barn, where the moon reflected on the still water. She didn't hear Dalton approach until he spoke. Couldn't sleep either. Beatrice turned, not startled but somehow expecting him. Too many thoughts. He nodded, keeping a respectful distance. "May I join you?" At her nod, he settled beside her on a flat rock overlooking the pond. For a while they simply sat in silence, watching the occasional ripple when a fish broke the surface. "When I was 16, Dalton said eventually, "I watched my father gamble away our farm in Missouri. He'd already lost my mother to fever the year before. After the farm was gone, he headed west, leaving me behind. Said I was old enough to make my own way." Beatrice looked at him, seeing the old pain etched in his profile. "I'm sorry. I worked odd jobs, learned to break horses, eventually found my way with cattle drives. Every ranch I worked, every dollar I saved was meant to get me closer to having my own place." He turned to face her. "I know what it's like to be treated as though you have no value, Beatrice, to be seen as a burden rather than a blessing. Is that why you helped me? Because you saw yourself in me?" "Partly," he admitted, "but there was more to it than that." He hesitated. "The moment you walked into my camp, something told me you were important, not just another person in trouble, but someone significant." Beatrice felt her heart quicken. "Significant to what? To me?" The simple admission hung in the air between them. "I know it hasn't been long, and you have every reason to be wary of men after what you've been through. But I want you to know that I see you, Beatrice, not as a burden or property or even just a woman who needs protection. I see you as a treasure, intelligent, resilient, kind despite everything. The kind of treasure I've been searching for without even knowing it." Tears pricked at Beatrice's eyes. No one had ever spoken to her this way, as if she had inherent worth beyond her usefulness or appearance. "I don't expect anything from you," Dalton continued, his voice gentle. "Just wanted you to know that to at least one person in this world you're irreplaceable." Before she could respond, a shooting star blazed across the night sky, leaving a trail of light that slowly faded. Dalton smiled. "Make a wish." Beatrice closed her eyes briefly, then opened them to find him watching her, his expression open and vulnerable. "What did you wish for?" she asked. "Can't tell you or it won't come true," he teased, then grew serious. "But I'll tell you what I hope for, that someday, when you're ready, you might consider me as more than just the cowboy who helped you." Beatrice reached out hesitantly and placed her hand over his. "I already do." The summer passed in a blur of work and quiet moments. Beatrice flourished under Mrs. Barnett's guidance, taking on more responsibilities at the ranch. Dalton proved himself invaluable during the roundup, earning the respect of even the most seasoned hands. Their courtship developed slowly, with proper regard for propriety. Evening walks by the pond, Sunday rides to the meadow beyond the north pasture, quiet conversations on the porch after supper. Dalton never pushed, never presumed, always allowing Beatrice to set the pace of their growing relationship. Word came from Prosperity that Warren and the prospector had been sentenced to time in the territorial prison for their attempt to sell Beatrice. The news brought relief, but also a strange sadness, the final severing of her last family connection, tenuous and terrible though it had been. "You have family here now," Mrs. Barnett assured her when she found Beatrice crying after receiving the news. "Family you choose, which is often stronger than the kind you're born into." In late August, a letter arrived from Mr. Barnett's lawyer in Phoenix. The elderly rancher called Beatrice and Dalton into his study one evening after supper. "As you know," he began, "Eleanor and I never had children. We've been discussing our future, and at our age, it's time to consider what happens to this place when we're gone." Beatrice glanced at Dalton, uncertain where the conversation was headed. "We've watched you both these past months," Mrs. Barnett continued. "Beatrice, you've become like the daughter we never had, and Dalton, your knowledge of ranching and leadership with the men hasn't gone unnoticed." Mr. Barnett cleared his throat. "We're offering you both a proposition. We'd like to begin turning over management of the ranch to you. Eventually, when we're gone, it would pass to you completely." Beatrice gasped. "But there must be family, distant cousins who have never set foot in Arizona," Mrs. Barnett dismissed. "This place needs people who love it, who understand it." "I don't know what to say," Dalton said, looking stunned. Mr. Barnett smiled. "Say you'll consider it. Of course, this arrangement would work best if you two were." He glanced meaningfully between them, more permanently connected. Later, walking beneath the stars, Beatrice and Dalton tried to process the Barnetts' offer. "It's everything I ever dreamed of," Dalton admitted. "A ranch of my own, well, ours, potentially." "It's overwhelming," Beatrice said. 6 months ago I was being sold for $40 as a burden no one wanted." Dalton stopped walking and turned to face her. "And now I know my worth isn't determined by what others are willing to pay for me." She looked up at him. "It's determined by what I'm willing to give and to whom." "Beatrice," Dalton said softly, "I meant what I said that night by the pond. You're a treasure to me, the most valuable thing I've ever found." In the silvery moonlight he knelt before her, taking her hand in his. "I don't have a fancy ring yet, but I have my mother's wedding band back in my trunk. Beatrice Vane, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Not because the Barnetts suggested it, or because it makes practical sense for the ranch, but because I love you more than I ever thought possible." Tears spilled down Beatrice's cheeks as she pulled him to his feet. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Dalton Keane, I will marry you." Their wedding took place in October when the cottonwoods along the creek turned golden and the air held the first hint of coming winter. The entire ranch turned out for the celebration, along with half of prosperity. The Barnetts stood in as family for both bride and groom. As Beatrice walked toward Dalton in a dress of ivory silk that Mrs. Barnett had insisted on ordering from San Francisco, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From a beaten, frightened woman sold for $40 to the beloved bride of a good man, co-manager of a prosperous ranch, surrounded by people who valued her skills and character. "You're a vision," Dalton whispered when she reached him. "And you're the man who saw me when I was invisible," she replied. The minister smiled at them both. "Dearly beloved." The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. When Dalton slipped his mother's ring onto Beatrice's finger, his eyes shining with unshed tears, she knew she had found home at last. At the celebration afterward, with music playing and lanterns glowing against the deepening twilight, Dalton pulled her aside for a moment of privacy. "Mrs. Keane," he said, testing the name on his tongue, "I have something for you." From his pocket, he withdrew a small leather pouch. "I've been saving for this since the day I asked you to marry me." Inside was a delicate gold necklace with a small diamond pendant. Beatrice gasped. "It's beautiful, Dalton, but you didn't need to. I wanted to," he interrupted gently. "Not because you need jewels to be valuable, but because I want you to have something that reflects even a fraction of what you're worth to me." He fastened it around her neck, his fingers brushing her skin. "Besides, every treasure deserves a proper setting, and every burden deserves to be lifted," she replied, wrapping her arms around his neck. "Thank you for lifting mine." As they rejoined the celebration, Beatrice caught Mrs. Barnett watching them with approval. The older woman raised her glass in a silent toast, which Beatrice returned with a radiant smile. Later that night, in the small house the Barnetts had given them as a wedding gift. Beatrice and Dalton stood at the window, looking out at their future, the sprawling ranch bathed in moonlight, the promise of years together stretching before them. "Did you ever think," Dalton asked, his arms around her waist, "when I found you that day in my camp that we'd end up here?" Beatrice leaned back against him, savoring his warmth and strength. "No, I was too afraid to hope for anything beyond escape. And now—" She turned in his arms to face him. "Now I know that sometimes the things we're running from lead us exactly where we're meant to be." She reached up to touch his face. "My stepfather called me a burden and sold me cheap, but you said I was a treasure. I think we were both right about one thing." "What's that?" "Value lies in the eyes of the beholder," she said softly. "And I'm very glad to be beheld by you, Dalton Keane." As he lowered his lips to hers, Beatrice knew with absolute certainty that she had found not just safety or security, but the rarest treasure of all, a love that saw her true worth. A love that would never again let her be diminished or sold short. A love that recognized her not as a burden, but as the most precious gift life could offer.